Well, did you know that it is more likely that you would die while taking a selfie than it is that you would die from a shark bite or being struck by lightning? There was a couple who tried to prove that true just last week on Highway 59 in downtown Houston during rush hour. And they stopped traffic while they got out, and their purpose was to take a selfie of themselves stopping traffic while they were taking a selfie. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense at all. And apparently a lot of people who were in this traffic jam and some who were able to get around were taking selfies of them taking a selfie, stopping traffic, taking a selfie. And so a selfie. And so the police apparently are trying to find this couple. So they tried to prove true that you might actually die while taking a selfie. Okay, so what's really behind taking a selfie? Taking a picture of yourself. That's kind of something we do, right? Now that we have cell phones. And one of the phrases that was used in the article that I read that I had not heard before said that this is called main character syndrome. Main character syndrome. That people just want attention. They want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They want to be the main characters in the drama of life. And most of us probably don't go around, most of us don't stop traffic, but most of us probably don't even go around taking a lot of selfies, but all of us have innately in us a desire for some kind of attention. The desire to be noticed. The desire to be seen. And we do that in other ways. We might do that with the kind of car that we drive. We want to be noticed because we drive a certain kind of car. We might do that by dropping names in conversations. We might do that by maybe just fudging a little bit on the details and telling a little innocent lie to make ourselves look a little bit better. We really all have the desire in us in some way to draw attention to ourselves, to be noticed. For me, it's clothes. And from the time that I was a teenager, one of the status symbols for me was the Ralph Lauren polo logo on my shirt. And just the other day, I went to the Faith Refuge Mission thrift shop. And I found me 3 shirts for a total of $16 that had the Ralph Lauren polo logo on them. And so what that says about me is I'm vain and I'm cheap. But we all want to make an impression. We all want to be noticed, to be admired for something that we have or for something that we do. And Jesus speaks to this very relevantly in the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapter 6. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. All right, this word hypocrite, first time that we find it in the Scriptures. And hypocrite is a bad word for us, right? Hypocrite is not a positive word. You don't want to be called a hypocrite. Hypocrite is why people don't come to church. That's one of the most often stated reasons that people don't go to church is they say, well, that church is just full of hypocrites. Hypocrites has a bad connotation. And while it is true, there's a lot of hypocrites in church, that's not the reason not to come to church. But Jesus took what was a neutral word, and Jesus is the one who really gave it the very negative connotation that it has. Before Jesus, a hypocrite was just a word for a type of actor who played a type of role on the stage. They were an actor who wore a mask in a play, and then Jesus takes that word and he uses it in the Sermon on the Mount and changes the way it's used until this very day. He uses the word 17 times when he's teaching to talk about people who wear a mask or put on an act to accomplish a self-serving agenda. And really what Jesus uses the word to describe people is hypocrites are people who do good things but do them for the wrong reasons, to be seen and to be honored by other people. Now, I want to be clear as I say this, because Jesus has no problem with you being public about your faith. Jesus wants you to be public with your faith. Earlier in the sermon, he says you are a light, and you are not to hide your light. You are to let your light shine before men so that they may see your good deeds. And so Jesus wants you to be public about your faith. Jesus honors folks and uses folks as illustrations who are public about their faith. He uses a woman who gives all she has in public as a positive example. He says of a woman who publicly broke a very expensive jar of perfume and then anointed him and wept over him and worshiped him in public. He says of her that her story is going to be told as long as his story is told. As we go through Acts, the church was very public about their praying and their giving and their fasting. But always in the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus is doing is taking us deeper. He's concerned about our heart. He's concerned about our motivation. And so the question becomes, what are you trying to accomplish with your righteousness, with your righteous deeds? What are you trying to accomplish when you shine your light and show your good deeds? Is it attention for yourself, or is it attention for the Father? Because that's how Jesus finishes the sentence that I didn't finish. Shine your light before men so that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. See, we do have a main character syndrome. And we are always tempted to make things about ourselves. And our acts of righteousness can never be about ourselves. It doesn't mean we stop doing acts of righteousness. It doesn't even mean that others don't see our acts of righteousness. It just means that we are never the main character, but it's always us making God the main character. See, Jesus is concerned about who gets the praise, who gets the attention. Later in Matthew chapter 23, when Jesus goes through this long series of woe to you to the religious leaders, one thing he says of them there is that everything they do is for people to see. So some of us struggle with this more than others. But I think in all ways, some of us struggle. Or I think all of us in some ways struggle with this desire to be noticed, to be appreciated. In fact, a lot of genuine good is done by people whose motive deep down is to be noticed and to be appreciated. And so Jesus, in this part of the Sermon on the Mount, is calling us to check our hearts and to check our motives. And so, why do we need to check our motives? Why do we need to check our heart? I want to give you 3 reasons this morning. The first one is this: we need to check our heart. We need to check our motives so that we will not become conditioned to live for the opinion of other people. We need to check our motives so that we don't get condition ourselves to live according to other people's opinion, because other people's opinion is going to change. And it's going to change often. And if we are too concerned about their opinion, then we are going to change and change often, and we will become hypocrites when we do that. So Jesus says you need to be salt and you need to be light. But very, very often, where salt and light are most needed, salt and light are least appreciated. Right? So if we're concerned about the other people and we're concerned about the opinions of other people, we're not going to receive positive attention for being salt and being light very often. Paul experienced this in his letter to the Galatians. He said, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of God." So in order to be what Jesus calls us to be, we cannot afford to become conditioned to live for the opinion of others. There's only one opinion that matters. And so we've got to check our hearts and check our motives. We also need to check our motives so that we won't be conditioned or become conditioned to focus on the exterior. And again, that's our temptation, to focus on the outward appearance, to focus on what we see or what others see. But Jesus is concerned with the heart, and that's always been true. All the way back in 1 Samuel 16, people look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so if all my focus is on impressing other people, then I'll always be focused on the exterior, and I'll never go deeper to the interior. I'll impress a lot of people, but here's what will happen. I'm going to be fractured. I will not be a person of integrity. See, integrity has to do with being whole. Integrity is when what's on the outside matches what's on the inside. Integrity is really a math term. And when you don't have integrity, when the outside and the inside don't match, what happens is it breaks down into fractions. And that's a very, very stressful way to live, because eventually my image is going to be shattered. And that's less likely to happen if we're listening to Jesus and checking our motives. And so the third reason that we need to check our heart, check our motives, is so I won't become conditioned to settle for the rewards of others. Because that's what the rewards of others is. It's settling. And what others think of you can be very rewarding. Jesus knows that. That's why 3 times he acknowledges that there's awards for impressing other people. It is rewarding for people to notice who you are. It is rewarding for people to notice what you did. It feels good, right? It's a shot in the arm. The problem is it passes very quickly. That's all that it was. That was the full reward. And see, we understand today that there's a chemical reaction that takes place in our brains when we get noticed, when we're appreciated, when we're praised, when we're rewarded. There's a dopamine that is released, and that feels really good. And you know what? Jesus knew that. But the problem is that is the full reward. And it's never fulfilling, and it's never lasting, and it only makes us hungry for more, and then it becomes an addiction, and so it needs to be checked. Those rewards in full are not so fulfilling in the end. And the applause of others dies away, but the applause of heaven lasts forever. And there are rewards in heaven. 3 times Jesus speaks of the Father seeing what other people can't see. The Father knowing what other people can't know. And that He rewards us. What are those rewards? I don't fully know. I don't fully know all of the rewards that God is giving us and will give us. I know this, God's gifts are always good. They're better than I can imagine. I think some of those rewards come in the here and now, and I think a whole lot of those rewards we're going to receive on the other side of eternity. And they're going to be worth waiting for, which parents and grandparents, it's why it's so critically important that you teach your children and grandchildren delayed gratification. In a microwave world, it's hard to be a crock pot, but we have got to teach our children delayed gratification. For this very reason, it helps us check our heart and check our motives. It teaches us and prepares us to wait on God and to look forward to His rewards and not become addicted to the rewards of the here and the now. So, those are a few reasons that it's important that we check our hearts and check our motives. To attend to our heart. Now I want to give you some ways that you can do that. How do you attend to your heart in this matter that Jesus is teaching us in the Sermon on the Mount? One way to do that is to focus on God as your Father. Focus on God as your Father. Over and over and over in this passage, Jesus keeps telling us, your Father in heaven, your Father in heaven, your Father in heaven. When He's going to teach us to pray, He teaches us to pray, our Father who is in heaven. Because at the root, for so many of us, at the root for this desire to be noticed, to get attention, is really a profound insecurity. That's what's at the root of that main character syndrome, a profound insecurity. And when people are not secure in who they are, they're going to look for security from somewhere. And so focus on God as your Father. As God as the source of your identity and your security and your worth. Focus on God as your Father who loves you, who created you, who knows you. There's a Christian writer from the past named George MacDonald. He wrote a lot of children's stories. And in almost every one of his children's stories, it's about princes and princesses. And one time he was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked, why are all of the kids in your stories, why are they princes? Why are they princesses? So he said, well, let me ask you a question. And he said, every little girl is a princess. The interviewer said, what do you mean? MacDonald said, well, what is a princess? And the interviewer answered, well, the princess is a daughter of a king. And MacDonald said, you've answered the question, because every little girl is a daughter of the king. And every little boy is a son of the king. And when we know that, it answers deep inside of us that question of identity and security and worth. And we'll be less likely to go looking for it somewhere else. So why do we check our hearts? How do we check our hearts? Focus on your relationship with God as your Father. Another way to do it is to focus on His kingdom and not your kingdom. Focus on His kingdom. Again, the very first sentence of the Lord's Prayer helps us with both of these things. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Focus on God as your Father and focus on His kingdom and not yours. His will, not yours. His agenda, not yours. And that's going to lead you to His rewards and not yours. Third way to attend to your heart. Undertake some undercover operations. do some things in secret. 3 times Jesus says this, to do things in secret, to pray in secret, to give in secret, to fast in secret. Now again, he's not commanding us to never do things publicly, but there's a discipline and a good discipline involved in sometimes doing some things that other people just aren't going to know or notice. Anonymity and secrecy are healthy disciplines in learning how to attend to your heart because it gives you some practice in delayed gratification. It gives you some practice in not receiving immediate rewards. And it allows you to answer a question, will I still find joy and reward if only God knows? And so in a world that is hooked on self-promotion, in a culture that is hooked on self-reward, and in which that reward lasts only as long as the social media post lasts, do something in secret. Do something undercover. Do something that gets you no attention whatsoever and that gets you no human earthly reward at all. And you'll find out whether or not your Heavenly Father really does reward. In preparing this message, I couldn't help but think of our sister, Virginia Hearn. When Virginia passed away a few years ago, she was known first and foremost at that point in time as our oldest member, as she lived to be 108 years old. But for most of her life, she was known not for being the oldest person around. For most of her life, she was known as the General, because that's what we called her. Now, not always to her face, but we called her the General. And the reason we called her the General is because she could mobilize people and she could get things done. And she was a force for good in this church for 108 years. She got a lot of good things done. She mobilized a lot of people to do a lot of really, really good things. And I remember one time we had this really bright idea that we were going to honor some of these folks who do so many good things. And so we inaugurated what we called the Servant Hearts Award. And we were going to have a Servant Hearts banquet. And we even had a scripture. We had reason to do this. Romans 13:7 says, give honor to who honor is due. And Virginia was our obvious first choice until she refused the award. In fact, she let us know she thought the whole thing was a bad idea. And I don't remember her exact words, but basically her thought process was this: don't steal my reward by giving me an award. Now, she may have carried that a little too far. She may have carried that a little further than Jesus intended. But who am I to argue with Virginia Hearn? And it probably wouldn't be bad if we were all a little bit more like her.